Welcome to the Beyond Jiu Jitsu podcast, episode number 13. We're really racking these up. Today's episode, we are talking about self-defense. Is Jiu Jitsu viable for self-defense?
Man, it's all about what works on the streets, yo.
Exactly, because we are all about the streets. I am Kieren Lefebvre. I am the co-host of this podcast. My qualifications include being a very beginner white belt, nutrition coach, and jiu-jitsu media person.
On your way to guru.
Yes, on my way.
Trying to reach the guru status.
Yes.
For me, I am Adam Childs. My wife and I own Alliance Sydney Jiu-Jitsu in Rose Bay. I'm a black belt under Alliance head coach Fabio Gurgel. And today we're going Beyond Jiu-Jitsu.
Beyond Jiu Jitsu. We need to get like one of those jingles. Are we actually
episode 13?
We are episode 13.
Dude, we're crushing it. It feels like...
We're so good.
It feels like, I think, I know we did an episode last week, but it feels as if it's been forever since we did an episode.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I don't know if it does for you, but for me, it feels like a long time has passed between recordings.
I mean, for our audience, it's going to be like, guys, you release like 2 a week. Come on. It's not going to make any sense. Just on the posting schedule, before we get into today's episode, basically, we have been releasing episodes fairly frequently up until this episode airs. It would have been around about average on 4 to 5 per week, just to get our launch of the podcast going. However, from now on, the posting schedule is going to be twice a week. We release episodes on Tuesdays and Fridays, Australian Eastern Standard Time at 5:30. So if you want to mark that in your calendars, that is the posting schedule for the podcast moving forward. We are also up and running on Instagram at Beyond Jiu Jitsu _podcast to check us out. And we also have a Patreon. If you want to support the show and keep things ticking over, jump over to Patreon. The link is in our Instagram bio, or you can simply search Beyond Jiu Jitsu on Patreon to support there. Bonus content, episodes, Q&As, and live streams are going to be what's hosted on Patreon.
Nudes.
And yeah, Adam is vouching. When we hit 10 Patreons, he's going to release his OnlyFans content on Patreon.
Careful, Dan and Jake will sign up 5 times each.
Excellent. Let's Dan and Jake sign up, please, if you want OnlyFans exclusives. But today, let's get into the jiu-jitsu. We are talking about self-defense. Is jiu-jitsu actually applicable for self-defense?
For real self-defense.
So first thing I wanted to ask you, Adam, as a gym owner, for those that don't know, Alliance Sydney head coach, owner with his wife, as he said, how many people join jiu-jitsu purely for self-defense?
For me, in my gym, not a lot, really. I'm trying to think, like, we've been open for 3 years, and if I think back through the amount of people because one of the important things that I ask any new member, and I've mentioned this in previous episodes just in passing, one of the most important questions I ask is why they've decided to train jiu-jitsu, because it just helps you better coach that student, because some people start just for a hobby because their friend did it. Some people do it to overcome anxiety or whatever. So you need to treat everyone a little different. So I more or less, at the time of a new student coming in, know the reason they're coming in. And if I think back over the 3 years, the amount, I would put it under 10. Probably less than 10 students I've had say they started jiu-jitsu because of self-defense.
Right.
That's not to say I don't want to already, be like, cool, episode over, bye. That's not me saying that jiu-jitsu doesn't work for self-defense. I'm just saying for my experience as a gym owner, a very few people, that's been the number one reason that they started. I would argue that's a byproduct of the fact that it's not really the way jiu-jitsu as a whole markets itself. Now that I say that, there are plenty of gyms who do go that angle. If you look at a lot of the Gracie models.
Yeah, I was just thinking Gracie Baja is more like that.
Are a bit more heavily modeled on self-defense, but I think the sport as a whole and the popularity of the sport, it's self-defense qualities that have made the sport grow, right? It's the competitive sport aspect that's made it grow.
Sporting side, yeah.
Yeah. So you typically get the most people who come and train at my gym, it's usually because, they've watched UFC or, something like that.
Okay, so for the purposes of a soundbite, does jiu-jitsu work for self-defense?
Yes, Kieren. Yes, it does.
Excellent. Full stop.
Yeah.
Let's elaborate.
It does. I mean, you have to, and as we talk, I do want to hear your point of view as well, because you're someone who, one of the good dynamics we have is two different ends of the spectrum in terms of a white belt's point of view and a black belt's point of view. But you also have another point of view, being that you come from the Navy, and it's not like you were a navigations officer in the Navy.
Yep.
So it's not like you were a Navy SEAL, like out there hand-to-hand combat, but you still go through basic training and all this sort of stuff and it's very different when you look at self-defense. It really kind of depends, what are you defending yourself against?
Exactly.
So Krav Maga is one of the best known self-defense martial arts, but it's like a military self-defense martial art. So does it work? Yeah. But also in Rose Bay of Sydney, how many people are going to pull an AK out in my face?
Yeah.
Zero, right? So it works, but it has zero applicability, whereas, so you would have some insight coming from a military sort of background as well, in terms of your opinion of jiu-jitsu as a self-defense. Whereas my opinion is, yeah, you would think so. Whereas, should we tell everyone you actually were kicked out of the Navy? Is that
not
public?
yet.
No.
We'll save that for another day. He's joking.
Yeah. But do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it depends, like self-defense in what scenario?
Yeah, that makes sense, because self-defense is such a broad statement, right? So if you're on a warship, the warship could undertake self-defense, but is the warship going to do jiu-jitsu? That's ridiculous. It's a fucking warship.
I don't know, man. I've seen Transformers. Missiles, right? I've seen Transformers, and they can do some things.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They could do hand-to-hand. Yeah. So in the context, okay, so let's be realistic. In the context, when most people think self-defense, you would probably be thinking like a bar fight scenario, right? So is jiu-jitsu going to help you in a scenario where you have an aggressor, you're facing an aggressor either on the street or in a bar, or maybe even at a party? Maybe you went to a friend's gathering, a friend's New Year's party, and someone that you don't know or what have you wants to pick a fight with you.
Yeah. There's a few things to consider. First thing I'll clear up, first of all, is one of the biggest criticisms jiu-jitsu gets as a self-defense is a lot of the competitive sporting jiu-jitsu techniques wouldn't work in self-defense.
What's an example?
I don't know, like a bearing bolo.
Yeah,
that's usually like the main, or butt scooting in general. That would be the main category, if you will, that gets criticized. Or you could also say another area that gets criticized is gi, and just using the gi in general, whether that's grips or gi chokes and what have you. But firstly, let me just deal with that very common criticism. The gi one is an easy solution because, well, in my opinion, I've spoken to this not on the podcast, but my students who have trained with me for long enough should know that they have to do gi and no gi. Right? For me, you have to do both aspects of the sport. So if they're not wearing a gi, cool, use your no gi skills. For those who say like, oh, but no one ever wears a gi. Well, I first started training in Canada, and I can tell you every single person
is wearing a gi and a belt.
Yeah, is pretty much wearing big, thick down jackets that, man, they have collars that are far more savage than a gi collar. Like these jackets are super thick, could be used as a gi. Right. In terms of the sporting techniques like bearing bolos and compromising positions, we were chatting about one the other day. I think it was
deep half guard.
Yeah, deep half guard, where a guy just got elbows dropped on him. Right?
Yeah, in the UFC. Yeah.
Yeah. So, of course, UFC is not MMA, not self-defense, but it's a situation with striking. if you're good enough at jiu-jitsu, let's take like Mikey Musameshi, who's known as having incredibly good bearing bowlers and all this stuff. What allows him to do that? Well, the fact that he can do everything else as well. If Mikey gets in a street fight situation, or let's say if I get in a street fight situation and I decide to deal with that situation by doing a bearing bolo, well, then that's not jiu-jitsu not working. That's me being a moron.
Yeah.
Right. So the criticism that, oh, but that wouldn't work on the street, blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, but okay, if you're doing a jiu-jitsu self-defense class or course, whatever, right? Let's say you turn up to the class and the timetable is, 5:30 self-defense. And in that class, the instructor's teaching a bearing bolo. Well, that's ridiculous, right? But, if you're a successful black belt, world champion, whatever, are you going to be able to use jiu-jitsu in self-defense? 100%. You're just not going to do the techniques that don't work in self-defense or are not advisable in self-defense.
I'd also counter with that, or add to that rather, and say that if you're in a position in the street, you're in a street scrap, and you're implementing your jiu-jitsu, when would the opportunity arise for you to do a berimbolo? Like, to me, I can't think of a scenario where a black belt enters into a one-on-one situation with an untrained, because
that's actually a good point as well, because as you'll find as you get higher up in jiu-jitsu and then you're training with lower belts, you often can't do those more advanced techniques. Like, even though nowadays bearing bolo isn't really considered that advanced of a technique, let's still say it is a more advanced technique. You can't do it on lower belts because they don't move and react in the way that they need to for you to be able to do that technique, in the sense that they don't defend the original attack appropriately. So then if you look at a self-defense situation as well, yeah, you could say, well, you'd never be in that position because an untrained person won't move the way that a jiu-jitsu fighter would move to allow you to do a bearing bolo ever. So you wouldn't do one.
I had this sort of discussion with a friend of mine yesterday, and we were saying that, like, we were speculating, what if you got into a street fight with someone and then it very quickly was obvious that you both trained jiu-jitsu?
That would be hilarious.
It would be terrible, but also hilarious. But I think in that scenario,
that could be such a good skit. It could go up one of two. Like, Key and Peele could do a skit. Do you know who Key and Peele are?
You were telling me about them.
Yeah, two super funny comedians, and they could do a skit about it. I could see it happening. It could go one or two ways.
But realistically, if that happened to you, you'd probably stop and be like, "Hang on a minute." It would be obvious, and you would probably say something if you weren't in the heat of it too much. You'd be like,
it would depend what the fight was about.
Exactly.
Right? If it was something trivial, you might just stop and all of a sudden be best buds.
Yeah, and be like, "Hang on, where do you train?" Gracie Balmain, or like wherever.
Yeah, and then the fight keeps going because you're like, you suck.
Yeah, Gracie. Yeah, exactly. It's like, Train Alliance, Northern Beaches. It's like, hang on a minute.
That would actually be hilarious. I'm sure it's happened at some stage somewhere in the world. But
yeah, I'm pretty sure there's videos on YouTube of people in Brazil having like mad full-on fights, jiu-jitsu people on the beach. But I think that's like a little bit different.
I'm not sure. I can't recall videos. I've probably seen videos like that in passing.
But I think that was different. It was like they knew who they were fighting and they did it.
I know that back in the day, though, I've heard stories from Fabio and Jacare. It was super brutal. Like, the different teams and gyms, man, it was almost like these little wars between them.
Gang rivalry.
They really hated each other. I mean, Fabio told me one story where, a group of rival gyms, a group of guys from a rival gym, they were okay with Fabio because Fabio fought MMA or something. Fabio had a good relationship with them for whatever reason, but one of the other guys at the gym, I don't know if it was one of Fabio's students or just another guy who trained at the gym, these guys legit were going to kill this guy. Like, they hated him so much. It was like, he's told stories about big rivalries and, so it doesn't seem too far-fetched to think that these jiu-jitsu fights broke out on the beach.
Yeah.
The beaches of Rio covered in coconut oil.
Yeah. It gets slippery and then goes straight into the no-gi. So what are some pros for jiu-jitsu in self-defense? Where are jiu-jitsu strengths over something like boxing or another striking martial art?
So the first point would be that, I don't know what the statistic is, but everyone goes like 80 or 90%, whatever it is, of street fights go to the ground,
Yeah.
whatever it is.
And 98% of statistics are made up on the spot.
Yeah. So I don't know what the actual number is, but you know what I mean. Most people who have any knowledge or read anything about self-defense have probably heard, X amount of fights go to the ground.
Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, obviously that's your strength as a jiu-jitsu fighter. You're more comfortable on the ground, but that doesn't mean you're going to take a fight on the ground. So what I mean is, if you're in a 1v1 situation, then you could hypothetically do whatever. It's not a risk for you to be on the ground. But the problem is, if you're then looking at a group situation, if it did happen at a bar or something like that, and then you end up on the ground and you're thinking, yeah, cool, I'm going to whatever, play guard, or even if you're on top, you're mounted on this dude, but then his friend runs up behind you and just hits you over the back of the head with a baseball bat or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, pull you a chair or something.
Yeah, if there's multiple people around, you could be in an incredibly dominant position on the ground, but if other attackers are present, it's definitely not where you want to be. So if you then think, okay, well, if that's not where you want to be, then what's the point? Jiu-jitsu, blah, blah, blah. Well, I've done this in training sometimes. I don't teach it all the time, but if I were to ask you what's the correct way to get up, right? Like, let's imagine you and I are rolling, or maybe a better example is UFC fighters, right? Where, I've taken you down, but you're a striker. That's your strength. You're going to do what? You're going to try get back to your feet.
Mm-hmm.
And you see it in UFC and MMA. It's not that easy. There's a lot of technique involved in trying to stand back up against someone who's trying to hold you down, right? So if I'm a jiu-jitsu fighter and I get in an altercation with some dude and he's got a bunch of friends around and I end up on the ground, if someone's going to sit there and tell me that I don't have a better chance of getting back to my feet than someone who doesn't train jiu-jitsu or like a boxer or something, that's ridiculous, right? So I would use my jiu-jitsu as a means to get back up off the ground. And then whether that means running or whatever, there's a lot of things to consider. Is it you versus 20 guys? Does the guy's mate have a knife, and you just want to run like hell? It depends. But the point I'm trying to make is your comfort on the ground and your ability to go from standing to the ground or from the ground to back up. The only other real martial arts that teach you that are if you're someone who trains MMA or wrestling, I guess. But even then, wrestling's a little different. So the strength would be that, yeah, a lot of fights go to the ground, but it's not necessarily where you want to be in a street altercation. If you train jiu-jitsu, I promise you're going to have a better chance at getting back up off the ground. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're saying in a scenario, regardless of whether it's you versus 3 people, 5 people, or one-on-one, if you had a black belt in jiu-jitsu and you regularly train, you're going to have a better chance to escape that situation. Or if it does, progress, handle yourself, being able to stand back up if you do go to the ground or take it to the ground if that's where you want it to be.
100%. It's worth noting as well, when you have the conversation about self-defense, like martial arts and self-defense, you always do kind of have to go into the conversation with the assumption that the aggressor doesn't also train
Yes.
a martial art, because then it's just, I'm not saying that scenario couldn't ever happen.
Well, it's a different discussion. Then.
Yeah, but exactly. It's a different discussion. Does jiu-jitsu work for self-defense when you get attacked by another black belt? Well, I don't know.
How good they are.
Yeah, depends how good they are, how good, it's kind of going to turn into a jiu-jitsu match, essentially, well, an MMA match, because there's probably going to be punches thrown.
Yeah.
Like, it's a different discussion, right? It's like, does boxing work for self-defense? Yeah, it does, but does it work against another boxer? Probably not if they're better than you, right? Because then they will outbox you.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So it's worth noting that, right? Because in the gym, it's very hard to get back up. Like if I were in your closed guard and I said, Kieren, I'm going to do nothing other than try to hold you down and you need to stand back up, it's hard, right? But if I got a fresh dude who'd never trained before and said, all I want you to do is hold him down, I promise you could get back up, you know?
Yeah.
So that's I think that strength can't be overlooked, right? If it's one-on-one, well, then you don't have to necessarily worry about getting back up.
You'd
right?
want it to be on the ground. And you
You'd
see that on
essentially want it
YouTube
to be on the ground. Yeah, right.
where like, say for, there's videos on YouTube where someone was like a black belt comes in and takes out someone that was trying to kidnap someone, and you see them, they always end up in their like back control, or like someone was like a black belt catches someone that is trying to escape the police, and there's so many incidences where people catch on film. Normally the end part, and you always see the jiu-jitsu practitioner have the perpetrator in back control with like a rear naked choke.
Yeah.
That's like what you see
Or
every time.
sometimes you see some ones I've seen from Brazil where a girl has been attacked and ended up on the ground on her back because it's the bigger dude who's just essentially, run into her like a truck.
Yeah.
And she's got closed guard on the bottom and gets them in a triangle.
Oh, wow.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I saw this
crazy.
video years ago back when I was living in Brazil. So I wouldn't even know where to start looking to find it.
That's crazy.
But yeah, and I don't think she put him out, but she just held him in the choke until the police came, and she had her friends around or something. So she was being looked after.
Wow.
And yeah, she just held him on the verge of passing out for however long until the police arrived.
It's nuts.
And that actually does remind me of another point that I don't always make it just because it's such a heavy and weighted subject, but I don't want to go too offensive isn't the right word because it's not offensive, but
like a trigger warning here.
Well, yeah, I mean, not to be too deep, but if you were a female and you were potentially being like sexually assaulted, closed guard is a very likely, spot you could find yourself.
Yeah.
I've trained with lots of girls over the years, and man, girls are incredibly savage at jiu-jitsu, right? And I've been choked by heaps of girls, like being in their closed guard, right? Like in a self-defense situation, if you were a female jiu-jitsu practitioner and you ended up closed guard on your back, having some, horrible person trying to take advantage of you, you're going to have a far better chance than anyone who's done any other martial art, I reckon. Even if you're a world-class Thai kickboxer, if you find yourself in that situation, I reckon the jiu-jitsu pedigree would serve you better.
I think a common argument, or like someone that doesn't train jiu-jitsu that might be arguing, like, say, again, back to boxing versus jiu-jitsu for self-defense. In that scenario, because in jiu-jitsu, we don't train for striking. So there's certain, I suppose, things that you may come accustomed to or things that you get used to in jiu-jitsu on the mats that may be detrimental on the street. For example, take a guard. When you have someone in your close guard, you're not expecting to be hit. So
that's right, yeah.
That's why they say you don't really see too much close guard in MMA. And everyone that trains jiu-jitsu understands that close guard is more or less a neutral position.
Yeah.
It's pretty evident, right? So the person that is
it's
on top,
considered a position that both people can score points from.
Yes. The person on top is looking to pass. The person on the bottom is looking to sweep or submit.
Yeah.
However, if you add striking into that, the person on top can be looking,
a massive advantage.
You're dropping bombs, son.
Yep.
You're dropping hammer fists. That's why in MMA, the close guard position, you see people get knocked out on the bottom.
Yeah, big time.
So all of a sudden it goes from a neutral position to being very one-sided.
Yeah.
So in jiu-jitsu, when you're training, how can you, when it comes to self-defense, isn't that a blaring hole in the self-defense of jiu-jitsu, is not including defense from strikes?
Well, there's depending on the gym that you train at, there is striking defense as part of their self-defense curriculum, if you will. I mean, it's going to change from gym to gym, but there's no foolproof system. You know, like everything has its own glaring holes. When people, if the question is, does it work for self-defense? I mean, the answer is simple. Like it's yes, right? Any to super simplify it, I put all martial arts into two categories. You have the martial arts that are more art and can be super beautiful and very hard to do, like, you know, things like the really elaborate kung fu and certain types of karate and, you know, tai chi and all these martial arts that they're more
Aikido.
art. Aikido specifically, like Steven Seagal's famous dog shit martial art, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they don't get me wrong. I'm not saying they're easy. I'm not saying they're not, you know, visually
But
pleasing.
Aikido does not work.
It does not work whatsoever.
Straight up, does not
whatsoever.
work.
They're more about the art, right? And then you have martial arts that are more combat. And what I mean by that is any martial art that you physically do it, right? Like boxing, any type of striking, really, boxing, Muay Thai, kickboxing, wrestling, as in college wrestling, Jiu Jitsu, all those martial arts where you're physically fighting someone within the rule set, but you're physically fighting them. Okay, so let's take, you know, boxing, for example. I've done Muay Thai over the years, but I definitely don't classify myself as a striker, and I really don't like getting hit. So if I were to get hit, right, that's going to, you know, can potentially stumble me, not as in physically stumble me, I'm going to get knocked out, although that could happen. I mean, stumble me as in, you know, it's not something I'm accustomed to. Whereas if you get someone who trains and competes in boxing, right, getting a hit to the head for them is not really that big of a deal, you know? And in jiu-jitsu, the same as you take a boxer, they're going to be really uncomfortable getting smothered and squashed and everything.
Yep.
But for jiu-jitsu people, you're used to it, right? It doesn't really bother you, you know? But so any martial art that falls into that combat category, as far as I'm concerned, does it work as a self-defense? Yes, 100%. Is any one of them better than the other? Well, yeah, I think jiu-jitsu is, right? But that doesn't mean the other ones don't work either.
So you're saying that you think that jiu-jitsu is better as self-defense compared with just doing boxing or just doing Muay Thai?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the argument is strikers always say something like, oh, you know, oh, but I'll like knock you out before you get close enough to take me down.
Maybe.
Of course, yeah, that can happen, right? But
maybe.
How many years of MMA, right? Essentially the closest we can get to a street fight without allowing people to eye gouge each other and whatever, and groin strike and things that would really take away from it being a spectator sport, really.
Yeah.
You know, how many years of MMA do we have to see until grappling as a whole is proven as being mandatory?
Yep.
Right?
I agree. Look at the first few UFCs.
Yeah.
UFC 1, 2, 3, 4. The Gracie's dominated.
Yeah.
Like simple.
And it doesn't mean that striking doesn't work, but find me a successful, like a top 10 ranked UFC fighter who doesn't train any grappling at all.
You just won't.
It's impossible. Like, it's, you know, and then, you know, the days of martial art X versus martial art Y don't exist anymore because of the birth of MMA and all this shared knowledge and cross training. So you just can't really get that anymore authentically. But you know, when that existed, it was proven that grappling or jiu-jitsu came out on top, and the second best one, the one that gave jiu-jitsu the biggest run for its money, were the wrestlers.
Yes.
You know, so essentially, even if we just put them together and just call it grappling, right? Grappling, in my opinion, is the best form of self-defense, because even though striking can be incredibly effective, not always. I was in a street fight once.
Ooh.
I've not been in many, but long story short, that was myself, my wife, and my brother, and we were on a tram in Melbourne, and we got jumped by about 20 dudes, like 20 sort of like in between 16 to 20-year-olds. They were just all out drunk, and they jumped us, and we got cornered in like one little corner of the tram, and we ended up just sort of like huddled in the corner, just getting bombarded by 20 dudes until the police arrived. But before we got swarmed by them, the main instigator guy, like full hit me with a massive right hook, right? So I got hit. Did it knock me out? No. And then at this time, I actually didn't train jiu-jitsu. This was before I started training jiu-jitsu. I trained Muay Thai. And then I grabbed him on the back of the head like a clinch.
Yep.
And I just pulled his head in and just kneed him right in the head. Didn't phase him at all, right? Like didn't knock him out. I'm not saying it couldn't have. You know, you do see that as well. You sometimes see people get knocked out by the most insignificant hits. But with adrenaline and stuff, people can take way more punishment than you realize.
Unless you hit them right on the button. So you're probably not going to stop a instigator or an attacker just with strikes, like, unless it knocks them out.
You could, right? But yeah, there's I mean, if we just play the odds and we go, all right, Kieren, you're only allowed to strike, and I'm just gonna. My goal is just to run at you and get close to you. I think that if we did that 100 times, I think at least 90 of those times I would get close to you and be hugging you
before I could knock you out.
Before you would instantly knock me out.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So I'm not saying that can't happen, but play the odds, right?
Yeah.
And the odds go for me that grappling is the superior form of self-defense, because it's just the ability to control what is happening. GSP is a beautiful example of it in MMA. His ability to control the fight, if he wanted it standing or on the ground, right? And it did result in some boring fights, but...
Well, Khabib is the modern day version of that.
He smashes.
Yeah, exactly.
You've seen his new instructionals, like on BJJ Fanatics?
Yeah,
I haven't
seen. I haven't actually gotten them, but yes, I've seen them. And he is a perfect example of, he is the superior grappler. His wrestling combined with jiu-jitsu is unstoppable.
Yeah.
And obviously he has a very strong foundation in striking. But if you were to say if you were to categorize Khabib in a category, I would put him in grappling over striking. Obviously he's MMA, mixed martial arts, but his specialty is grappling. And I'd say the same or something similar about GSP.
Yeah.
With his specialty is jiu-jitsu. Grappling.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. So I think for me that, gives a nice summary of like just whether it works or not. But if we look at a few other points that people bring up is what if weapons are involved? So if someone has a knife, is jiu-jitsu the most effective martial art? I don't know.
Well, really, Krav Maga would be, right? Because you're trained specifically to deal with weapons. But
yeah, I guess, right? I've never really trained Krav Maga, so I'm not exposed to it enough to really know if it works. A lot of those martial arts where you're disarming people and doing this and that kind of require a very willing training partner, and when you train something like jiu-jitsu, you realize, it's not as simple as me just doing this little whirlwind motion and the guy's gonna like let go of what's holding what he's holding in his hand, right? You realize how difficult it can be to actually physically manipulate someone's body when they're resisting. So I haven't trained Krav Maga to really learn any of the techniques and just go, man, I would just resist that and that would never work. But what I will say, well, firstly, I'll say I would never like to fight someone with a knife. Knives are super scary. They can be concealed. It's not like you see in self-defense where a guy goes for a big like lunging one stab attack and you kung fu kick the knife out of their hand. No, right? It's usually these little like
shanks.
Yeah, like you see people get stabbed in in prison movies or shows, right? It's this like jab, 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 jab to the stomach or something. It's terribly scary. I would never want to fight someone with a knife. What I will say that jiu-jitsu has, if you are unfortunate enough to find yourself in that situation, is I would say it's one of the leading martial arts in giving you the skill to isolate a particular limb of a person. So if you've got a knife in your right hand and I can control your right hand / arm, that's going to allow me to hopefully avoid me getting stabbed, right? And I would say jiu-jitsu practitioners have a better chance at controlling a body limb of an opponent than any other martial art does.
That's if they were to close the distance, right?
Yeah, but what are you going to do? Fucking throw the knife at me?
Yeah, exactly. exactly. So the counter argument would be, but if you were a pro Muay Thai fighter, you can control the distance with your limbs. You can, keep them at bay. I mean, well, yeah,
but
you
no,
could.
right? Like someone running at you.
Yeah.
No. I just, my brain's hurting thinking about the people who actually believe that stuff. But look, like I said, I haven't spent a lot of time in knife self-defense.
Yeah.
But it's also something where I'm playing the odds or the statistics. First of all, in Australia, I've only ever been in that one street fight I just mentioned, or maybe one other one, which I can't even remember. So in other words, like one street fight, let alone any altercation I've ever been in with a knife. Different parts of the world, it might be different. Well, it would be different. In some parts of the world, it might be a reality that, it's like self-defense and knife self-defense is synonymous in some parts of the world. And I'm not, I'm really can only speak from a jiu-jitsu expertise point of view.
Well, I think the best defense, if we were going to say universally, the best defense someone against a knife is to have a gun.
Yeah. And then if we go into gun defense, what is this, America?
Yeah, like
the best defense against guns is legislation.
Oh yeah, wow.
No, but
it's a drone strike.
Yeah, like gun self-defense and disarming people with guns. I mean,
let's just not. It's not so out of the realm.
It's so out of the realm of what we would talk about. Maybe it's a relevant conversation in Florida, or something. But it's just. It's not for this podcast.
So in terms of like the basic weapon you'd expect without it being a gun is a knife, and you're saying that jiu-jitsu training enables you to isolate that limb to lock it.
I'm still saying you ideally definitely don't even want to take that fight.
And I think both of us agree that the first defense is to run the fuck away as fast as you can.
Yeah.
But if you cannot, like in the scenario where you're locked in on the tram, replace the 20 dudes with one guy with a knife. You're
and you have
stuck.
to do something, right?
Stuck.
Yeah,
like to rely on running away in all self-defense scenarios is ridiculous because these people that are looking to attack you know that's going to be
hungry, bro. They're coming for you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the thing. Like if someone is going out of their way to rob people at knife point or whatever, like just give them your shit first of all.
100%.
If they just want to attack you, if it's not about they're just insane or something, they're going to be considering your ability to run away. They're going to try and corner you and trap you. So then you need to be able to defend yourself. And what you're saying is, if you're in a closed environment on a tram and you don't have space to run and throw kicks and stuff like that, jiu-jitsu is probably going to be one of your best opportunities to isolate the limb.
That's a really good point as well. I know I've thought of it, but I didn't mention it. Talking today was what if you're somewhere where you don't have the space to throw punches or kicks?
Like
I guess you could argue
Muay Thai.
Sorry,
Muay Thai is very kick dominant.
You need way more space.
Yeah,
little dirty boxing. I guess you don't need as much space.
Chuck
but I guess
short elbow. But yeah.
I guess you could argue that you need a lot of space for jiu-jitsu too. But anyway, I get the point that you were making. The other thing, and I guess for me, probably the final point that for me really drives home why jiu-jitsu is such a good self-defense martial art is that sometimes in self-defense, you don't want to hurt the attacker, right? It's not always some person trying to rob you. or sometimes, so you could find yourself, let's take a very real situation that happens to frontline workers, like nurses or something or paramedics who are dealing with, really aggressive patients, whether it's because they're drunk or it's because they've got some kind of mental illness or
even police.
Or police, or firefighters trying to take someone, out of a dangerous situation that they're refusing to.
Or even if you're not in one of those extreme circumstances, you could be at a family barbecue and maybe your uncle got really drunk and is having a go at your dad or something. I don't know.
Yeah, and
it could be a family member. It could be a
maybe
friend.
your uncle's a prick, but you don't necessarily want to Mike Tyson knock him out.
Yeah, or Krav Maga gouge his eyes out, or take out his fucking esophagus or something.
Yeah, or you have to, hey, Uncle Bill, here, hold this knife so I can disarm you, then stab you.
Yeah, exactly.
God damn it, and for that, jiu-jitsu is far above and beyond. I'll give you a perfect example of something that happened to me. I won't mention who was involved, but there was me and a group of people, and there was a lady who was with part of my group who got into an argument with this other lady who was massive. She was pretty much my size, and I'm 6'4".
Wow.
Right? 6'4", 100 kilos. She was a big girl. Okay. And anyway, what the argument was about isn't important, but the lady started the physical altercation of the argument. She pushed the lady who was with me, and then the lady who was with me threw her drink in her face. Very common movie scene reaction, right?
Take that.
But then this other lady full on decked the woman that was with me, full king hit her.
Like a roundhouse. With a fist.
like a hook, right? Full king hit this lady that was with me. So imagine what would my options be if I was only a striker? Very limited, right?
Punch her in the face, and then and then you're a woman basher.
Yeah, and then I'm off to prison.
Yes.
So I launched across the space that we were in, and I grabbed this lady essentially in a rear naked choke, but I wasn't applying the choke. I was just holding her.
Control.
And dragging her away. And she was still swinging. As I'm dragging her backwards, she's swinging at the other lady, right? And then we there was a bunch of stuff on the ground, and we ended up kind of stumbling and tripped, and I let go of her, and she just fell on her butt. And that was more or less, that was the end of the physical altercation.
And then you mounted and just ran a pound.
And then it was like Ezekiel choked her. And that was the end of the physical altercation, right?
Right.
But imagine, obviously the police came, asked if charges wanted to be pressed, blah, blah, blah. But imagine if I was, a striker, and then I've gone and, uppercutted this woman. I mean, even
your options are limited.
And then in court,
scenario.
I'm like, oh, but she pushed my friend.
But you're a 6'4" fucking 100 kilo dude,
right? Whereas I was able to control the situation without anyone getting hurt. Well, other than the initial combat between the two ladies, right?
Yeah.
But I didn't hit anyone. I didn't choke her, right? I just pulled her backwards, and then we stumbled and fell over, right? And that was the end of it. So if you're in a situation like that, a situation, it's your uncle, or you're a frontline worker and you're dealing with a patient or something like that, man, how is jiu-jitsu not the best, or grappling not the best?
In that scenario, in these scenarios especially, that's where it really shines as a self-defense, because in my opinion, boxing versus jiu-jitsu, they're on the total opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of control. In jiu-jitsu, you have the ultimate ability, regardless of whether it's standing or on the ground, to have an element of control over your opponent.
Yeah.
That's the whole basis of the martial art, is a series of controlling positions, a hierarchy of positions that at the end of the day are designed to advance your position and control your opponent every step of the way.
Yeah.
Whereas boxing, like you just said, you have the ability to defend yourself against strikes and to counterattack, to strike your opponent. There's an element of control there in terms of distance and space and everything, but it's nowhere near on the same level.
Nowhere near. I mean, I'm not saying that boxing or striking isn't incredibly dynamic and difficult and all these nuances, but I don't think it compares to the amount of of control over another person's
Yeah.
physical being
Yep.
that jiu-jitsu or wrestling, grappling as a whole gives you.
And I think the reason that people believe that, or that this argument is, so ancient, despite UFC,
Despite it being proven,
time again, is because in the back of
humans
everyone's
are idiots.
well, in the back of everyone's mind, particularly dudes, like young guys, and I've been guilty of this. Don't get me wrong. Like particularly when I started, going to the gym for the first time, and I was 18, I'd only wear string singlet. Have you seen those stringers?
Oh god, they're so
exclusively wear
I
stringers.
was about to say they're cringe, but to be fair, you were like a competitive bodybuilder.
This is before that.
Cringe,
yeah, it's
bro.
super cringe. So I was like, just turned 18. I'd been training at the gym for like 12 months. I thought I was king shit. I was like 70 kilos, dripping wet. Like I was tiny, right? But when you get beginner gains and you just think you're so much bigger than you are, I had like body dysmorphia in the other way, right?
Yeah.
So, but during that time, I thought I was king shit. I thought I was, 6'4" and bulletproof, right?
Yeah.
I thought I was unstoppable. But in the back of every particularly young man's mind, they think that it's almost like a meme these days that it's kind of like, yeah, but when it comes down to it, I've got that drive.
Yeah,
in me, I've got to kill a mentality.
Yeah. Oh,
and it's ridiculous. And it's so hard to explain to someone that hasn't trained. And I know most of our audience has probably trained jiu-jitsu, so you know what I'm talking about here. But if you haven't trained before, you probably think, yeah, when it comes down to it, I could probably take my Uncle Bill. Even though he's like 90 kilos and drunk and in a rage, I could take him, But when you do roll with someone for the first time and they are going semi 100% or, not 100, but they are actually trying, you're like, holy fuck, this is not what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
It is completely different to what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah. And I think any male who's gone through their late teens has had that thought pass through their head.
Oh, 100%.
Right? But it's funny, like when you're someone who actually does train, you're far less likely to think like that. Of course, there are people that exist who do train combat sports. I'm not even going to say martial arts anymore. I'm going to refer back to the two categories.
Yep.
And, there are people who train combat sports and are bad people who do still look for fights and stuff like that. But I would say the majority of people who train will actively do what they can to avoid fights, not necessarily because of that cliche, they know they can lose or whatever, but it's more just like, it's not even worth it's not worth my time and
you have nothing
effort.
to prove.
Yeah. I got nothing to prove. Like
that's, I think that's the biggest thing, particularly young, like I'm going to, be a little bit sexist here, particularly young men, like a young guy who doesn't train has something to prove because it's almost ingrained within our brains, almost evolutionary to want to prove yourself physically over other men. It's like a primitive dominance sort of thing.
And you know what? You see people who are unwilling to let that feeling or that thought belief slip away. I've seen it even just my short 3 years of running my own gym, but I've seen it prior to that as a student, but even seen it just in the 3 years of guys who come in and think they're tough shit and they realize from class 1, class 2, class 3 or whatever that they're not, and they move on, because they don't want to lose that belief. And then you see people who go the other way. They're amazed at the power of jiu-jitsu when they stick around and keep training. But I've seen heaps of people who, oh yeah, when it comes down to it, I could take him. Yeah. They realize that they're absolute dog shit when they actually train a combat sport.
And I'm not saying
this is, and this isn't unique to jiu-jitsu. It would happen in striking as well. People think like, yeah, man, I could take him. Then they do a 3-week trial.
Hold my own.
They do a 3-week trial of Muay Thai and realize that they'd be knocked out in 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And then they stop training because they just would prefer to go along with that disillusion of thinking they could take him. When it comes to it, man, I could take him.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. And I think back to the point of like why people that train don't have that feeling in the street, or like when you're in an altercation with someone that they need to engage in that, it's because you don't need to prove yourself. You don't need to.
Because you do it on the regular in the gym.
Exactly.
Like, again, you will meet people who do train and do think like that. I could take him. Of course, there's different types of people.
To the rule.
Yeah. But as a whole, like you're like, oh man, I already have.
You've had that release.
little air bunny quotes, 10 fights a day
Yep.
in the gym. Like, I don't need to fight some loser on the street.
Yeah.
You know?
What are you trying to prove? It's ridiculous. And I think
And
that's,
even if you did, like he's not going to appreciate how slick that arm drag was. He doesn't even know. So
Yeah.
what's the point? There's no sponsors around.
Yeah.
There's no showy
and
roll.
you could hurt them, you could hurt yourself, it's just a ridiculous thing to do. It's juvenile. But I think the biggest point, and I think one of the biggest advantages of jiu-jitsu is not even feeling the need to engage, and that can't be understated, because I know we've been dealing a lot with scenarios where you have an aggressor, because we're talking about self-defense. But if we're being honest with ourselves, that's not how all, conflict out in the real world starts. A lot of the time, it's both parties engaging. So if you can eliminate one of those parties wanting to engage in a physical altercation, then for the majority of cases, it will never happen in the first place.
Yeah.
And I think, without sounding too lame, that's the real power of jiu-jitsu, is to eliminate that need or that feeling that you need to, go in and clobber someone to prove your manliness over them or some dumb shit.
Until you get someone on the internet trolling you,
Right,
and then you're
on.
like, if I see you in person.
I think with my keyboard.
Yeah. Just to, obviously we both agree that it works for self-defense. I said at the beginning, all combat martial arts work for self-defense. I think jiu-jitsu is the best because of the reasons that we mentioned. Again, I said this at the start, but I'll say it again. It is very important as a student of jiu-jitsu to understand the difference, though, between self-defense jiu-jitsu and competitive sport jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's as clear as that technique wouldn't work in this situation, and that goes both ways. Like, again, bearing bolo is probably not the best thing to do in self-defense, and a lot of self-defense jiu-jitsu self-defense techniques would never work against a trained jiu-jitsu fighter, but they would work against a drunk attacker, right? So it's very important to understand the difference. Some things translate both ways, but they're also different situations. There's techniques that you do in sport competitive jiu-jitsu that would work in self-defense, but you may not want to do it because self-defense usually takes place on concrete or something like that, not on padded mats.
Yep.
So it's just very important to understand there's a difference. Self-defense is designed to work against someone who doesn't train, right? Whereas sport jiu-jitsu, competitive jiu-jitsu, is to work against other jiu-jitsu fighters.
Yeah, I'm not going to go for a flying armbar on the streets or something like that.
Exactly, right?
Or really, I'm probably, and I mean, not to get us too back into the rabbit hole, but I'm probably not going to go for joint locks if I can avoid it. I probably would prefer to go for a choke.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, if you're up against someone that doesn't train and you have them in an armbar, they're probably not going to understand what's going on. And what are they going to do? Tap? Like, they might not even know to tap, or and then all of a sudden you've just broken their arm. And I mean, the cynical out there will be like, well, that teaches you for attacking me. But I mean, come on, if you can avoid breaking someone's arm,
it's just way safer, because if you had them in a choke or something, if it got to it, put them to sleep, take their wallet, move on.
take their wallet, steal their phone, take their girlfriend.
But I mean, they even say that in competitive jiu-jitsu that, a choke is always preferable to an arm lock. There's been plenty of examples of professional athletes refusing to tap and having a joint broken.
Mm-hmm.
The most famous one is when Hodja fought Jacare at the whatever Worlds. I can't remember.
Jacare let it break?
Yeah, because Jacare was up on points. Hodja had him in an armbar. Jacare let his arm break.
Yeah.
And then with a broken arm was able to get out of the armbar and then managed to survive until the clock went on and then was crowned world champion. But Hodja was like, well, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I won because I broke your arm. And it's funny though, right? I don't know if the rules have changed since then in jiu-jitsu, because in MMA, if an arm's getting broken, the ref stops the fight.
The ref can't stop it, yeah.
But I don't know if
they actually
if anyone knows the answer to this, because I actually don't know if since that Hodja Jacare fight, if they have changed the rules. But yeah, clearly in that fight, the ref didn't stop the fight. Nor you could see Jacare's arm was broken and he was just running the clock out. The ref didn't stop the fight to say, man, you're done, your arm's broken.
Yeah.
So I don't know if they've changed the rules since then, but that's they say chokes are better because it doesn't matter how big and strong you are, how tough you are, how high your pain threshold is. You cut off the blood to the brain, you pass out.
Yep.
Exactly.
Well, if you know the answer to that, let us know.
Yeah, if you do know the answer to that rule. I mean, that was an IBJJF competition, but just jiu-jitsu competitions as a whole, I actually don't know if refs are told like, if someone's got their arm broken, you stop, they've lost.
I think definitely at like my level, it would definitely happen. There's no way in like if you go to a local white belt competition and the ref clearly can see that your arm's broken, but you're fighting on, they're going to stop the fight.
Well, yeah, for kids divisions as well, I know that specifically the refs stop it, so there's different rules for the kids divisions.
They can't do a lot of
first of all, they can't do a lot of certain submissions. They're not allowed to do Ezekiel's. They're not allowed to pull down on the back of the head in triangles, heaps of different rules. But yeah, particularly, arm bars, for example, the ref won't even wait for the other kid to tap. Once that arm's extended, they stop it. And it's just for safety reasons, because you listeners would know just from being in the gym, let alone in a competition, with adrenaline and when you're really fighting hard, you can push pretty far through submissions that you might not injure yourself as in break something, but you could have a sore elbow for weeks or something like that.
I've been in a nearly fully extended armbar in a comp, the last one, if you remember. And I mean, it was extended enough. If we were in the kids division, it probably would have been stopped. But I was just sitting in it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
But kids don't have that understanding. They don't tap quick enough. Their joints are more flexible because they're still growing. So they can hyperextend and get injured really badly. So the refs don't even let that happen, right? Yeah. They stop it straight away.
Cool. All right. Well, just as we close this out, it's pretty clear from everything we've spoken about over the last hour or so that in your opinion, as a BJJ black belt, and in my opinion, as a white belt, if you say it quietly, no one will hear, that jiu-jitsu absolutely works for self-defense. And if anything, if you're going to choose one martial art or one discipline, one combat sport, we'll say, jiu-jitsu is...
Just play the odds. Play the odds. I said when we spoke about Krav Maga, and if you're in a part of the world where 99% of street fight self-defense situations involve a knife, okay, then I don't know. I haven't trained Krav Maga. Maybe Krav Maga is the way to go. But sitting here in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, right? I play the odds, and the odds jiu-jitsu.
Yeah,
right? I've never been in an altercation with a weapon, nor have I ever seen it happen. The closest thing to a weapon around here is you see people with a glass or a beer bottle.
I was about to say it's me, but I'm a tank. Cool.
So that would be my summary opinion. And
I agree. And that was, I think, I definitely learned a lot.
If you have some hate on it though, let me know. And I will shut you down on a future episode.
You can send Adam hate mail directly. His address is as follows. No, but definitely check us out on our Instagram at Beyond Jiu Jitsu _podcast. And if you have any questions that you want answered on the show, either for myself through nutrition and media sort of background, or if you want to submit a question to the man himself, Adam Childs, in our Ask a Black Belt segment, we have another Q&A coming up very shortly. That's going to be in a few episodes' time. So if you have any questions you want answered on the show, head over to our Instagram and send us a DM and just mention in that DM that this is a question for the show, and we'll air it on the next Q&A episode.
Yeah. Otherwise, next episode, we're talking about some of the key mistakes, most important mistakes that lower belts make from a technical point of view when learning jiu-jitsu / training jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
So if you feel you're someone who
sucks,
or maybe you're an instructor and you're wanting to be a bit more educated on things to look out for that lower belts have a habit of doing, check that out. That episode will be following.
Absolutely. So stay tuned for episode number 14, where we are talking about more technical side of jiu-jitsu. Until next time, thanks for listening.
Later, Gator.